This is Westminster Abbey in London, and it's unfinished. Look, there is a base for the central tower, but it was never built. That's completely normal for Gothic architects. They had ambition, so they used to plan so big that most of the Gothic cathedrals you will see in your life will likely be unfinished. I want to show you the biggest Gothic dreams left incomplete, the tallest towers in the world that never came to be, the most ambitious plans, and in the end of the video, the greatest achievement of Gothic architecture ever, which I am sure you have never heard of. We will start from the cathedral in Siena, which is near Florence, Italy. What we see here is a complete cathedral, but there is a strange structure just next to it that tells the story of ambition. After completing the cathedral, the citizens of Siena started planning a huge enlargement, much longer and higher. Construction began, and more than half of the new cathedral was finished. But then structural problems have emerged, and the Black Death happened, which devastated the city, so the project was abandoned. I love how beautiful and unique this space is, with some of the pillars and walls still there. It was supposed to be the interior of a beautiful cathedral, but today it's just the most beautiful parking lot in the world. And above the roofs of Siena rises the main facade wall, still having those holes for scaffolding. Now they even let people go up there for a view, so how cool is that? Number 4. Imagine a tower so massive that when you build it, its slow settling into the ground could damage the rest of the cathedral. The architects had to leave a gap between the tower and the cathedral building, closing the connection only after the tower had settled. This is the case of Melen Cathedral, which, if completed, would have had the highest Gothic tower ever, even today. Sadly, they ran out of funds in the early 16th century, having built quite a lot. This unfinished bell tower is actually pretty gorgeous on its own, with a height of 97 meters. But the original plan was to reach 167 meters. Apparently, a survey made in 2005 showed that the foundations and the walls would still be capable of bearing the remaining part, so potentially the tower could still be completed someday. Do you think they should do it? Number 3 is another unfinished giant not far from Mechelen Cathedral. It was built by close neighbors, probably in a competitive spirit. The towers of Mechelen and Leuven would be directly visible from each other's tops if finished, which ironically both were not. Apparently the city of Leuven really wanted to surpass their neighbors, so a very extraordinary design was planned here. Mechelen Cathedral builders went for a single tower. Very often you would see a cathedral with 2 towers, and here 3 were planned, placed tightly together, forming a single facade. The height would be an overwhelming 170 meters, just a bit higher than the neighbors in Mechelen planned for their bell tower. The builders who were promising to do more have actually delivered less, so today we can only see this mighty first level prepared, but not much more. Only a model of the spires inside the cathedral remains of the daring plan. Number 2 I love especially, because there is mystery to it. There are some known plans or projects for all the other buildings that I mentioned in this video, but about this one we have no idea what the whole thing would have looked like. There are no plans or projects or descriptions. I can just speculate about that, based on the parts that were actually constructed. But the constructed parts, they do give us a lot of intriguing clues. So this is the Monastery of Batalia in Portugal. It has this big and beautiful cathedral built in classical Gothic style. And then there is something epic in the eastern part, the unfinished mausoleum of the Portuguese kings. Even the part that was constructed is alone comparable to the full-scale Monastery Cathedral here, but chances are the total structure would have been one of the most impressive medieval buildings ever. Now, this is only my personal speculation, and actually there is no consensus on how this thing would have looked. But when I see how huge those pillars are, I imagine there must have been something grandiose planned on top, maybe even a couple more levels. The entrance to the mausoleum is also huge, so that's more evidence for the grand scale of the planned structure. Also note how outrageously rich in the carving the portal is. That's because the mausoleum was partly built during the reign of Manuel I, when Portugal was prospering and a very eccentric and flamboyant Manuelino style emerged. Just look at the weird details like these spiraling columns, or this column that has branches just like a tree. Number 1 in the list is the cathedral that remained mostly unbuilt. And the built part has partially collapsed. And even today there is some structural danger present. Despite that all, Beauvais Cathedral is peak Gothic architecture. Here's why. Imagine 13th century northern France. The Gothic architecture was invented not long ago and has been thriving for the past decades. And there is something of an informal competition happening. Who will build the greatest cathedral in this new style? The main metric was the interior height. The builders of the new cathedrals were trying to surpass all the previous ones, pushing technology to its limits. And Beauvais Cathedral got to be the highest of them all. The scale is enormous. My favorite way to grasp it is this. Imagine a 13-floor building and then imagine that it fits inside a Gothic cathedral, so the walls are wrapping around it. They started building the cathedral from the choir and have constructed it relatively fast. This was an enormous structure with almost 47 meters of interior height. Sadly, it managed to stay intact for just 12 years, after which a section of the vault collapsed. It took another half a century to repair everything and add some additional columns, and then plague and war stopped construction for a long time. They only managed to build this transept part in the 16th century, finishing it with a huge spire, which was said to be the tallest in the world. Sadly, it had collapsed after just a couple of decades. So today we have this small part of the enormous cathedral built. There are still some structural problems with the building, so there are these temporary wooden supports inside. The central section of the cathedral, where the fallen spire used to be, is covered with wood, not stone. And alongside the huge cathedral, the previous church is still standing, the demolition of which froze in time, along with construction of the Gothic cathedral. So this is just 1 hour from Paris by train, and I hope you will experience this grandiose building someday. Let me know in the comments if you haven't heard of this structure before, because I think it's much less famous than it deserves to be. Now for the very final chapter of this video. I planned to make it really big, but what I actually want to say is, do you think there is some charm in being forever incomplete?